At 5 in the morning, the last person I expected to see was my boss standing outside my apartment door. At first I honestly thought I was still half asleep. I had gone to bed late, my phone was on silent, and somebody knocking that hard before sunrise felt wrong enough that I just stood there for a second in the dark, trying to place the sound. Then I looked through the peephole and saw her. Not in heels. Not in one of those sharp coats she wore into board meetings like she owned the air in the room. Just a sweater, loose hair, no makeup that I could see, and a face that looked tired in a way I had never connected to her before. I opened the door and the first thing out of my mouth was, "Are you okay?" She gave this strange little laugh, like even she knew how insane it looked. "No," she said. "I don't think I am." That woke me up fast. I stepped aside and let her in without thinking too hard about it. The hallway light from outside followed her in for a second, then the door shut, and it was just my apartment, my old kitchen table, and the woman who ran the company standing in it like she had taken a wrong turn somewhere in her life. "I'm sorry," she said, still near the door. "I know this is not normal." "No," I said. "It really isn't." That almost made her smile, but it faded right away. I told her to sit down while I made coffee. My place was small, so there was no graceful way to do any of it. She was maybe 6 feet away while I filled the kettle, moved yesterday's mail off one of the chairs, and tried not to act like I was fully aware that if anybody from work could see this, my life would instantly become a disaster. But the truth was, work was not what the room felt like. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands around a mug before there was even coffee in it, like she just needed something to hold. I'd spent 3 years seeing her across conference rooms, on company calls, in polished all-hands meetings where everybody straightened up when she spoke. I knew the version of her that made decisions quickly and never repeated herself. I did not know this woman. When I set the coffee down in front of her, she looked up and said, "Thank you." So quietly I almost missed it. I sat across from her and waited. For a while all I got was silence. She stared at the steam rising from the cup, like she was trying to remember why she had come. I wasn't about to push. I barely even spoke to her directly unless a meeting required it. I worked in operations. I was useful, invisible, and good with that arrangement. People like me lasted longer in companies like ours by keeping things simple. Then she said, "The divorce was finalized yesterday." I nodded once. I knew she was getting divorced the same way everyone in the building knew. Carefully, indirectly, through changes in routine nobody commented on out loud. "I thought I'd feel better after it was official," she said. "Lighter, maybe. Clearer." "You don't." She looked at me with red eyes and gave a tired shake of her head. I felt relieved for about an hour. Then I made the mistake of letting a friend set me up with someone. That caught me off guard. "Tonight. Last night." She let out a breath through her nose. "He was perfectly nice." That somehow made it worse. He kept talking like I was starting some exciting new chapter, like I should be celebrating. She wrapped both hands tighter around the mug. I went along with it. I smiled. I answered questions. I acted normal. Then I sat in my car afterward and realized I could not make myself drive home. There was nothing dramatic in how she said it. That was what got me. No big speech. No performance. Just the flat honesty of somebody who had run out of energy to pretend. "So you came here?" I asked. She looked embarrassed for the first time. "Yes." "Why?" "That took longer." Finally she said, "Because you never seem like you want anything from anyone." I didn't know what to do with that. I looked down at my coffee, then back at her. That's a strange compliment. It wasn't meant as one. She paused. Maybe it was. I don't know. I should have told her this was a bad idea, that she needed a friend, or a sister, or literally anybody who wasn't one of her employees. Instead I stayed in that chair and listened while the sky outside my window slowly started turning gray. She told me the divorce hadn't blown her life open the way she expected. It had just removed the structure around a loneliness she'd been delaying. I told her, more than I planned to, that after my last serious relationship ended, I got very good at building a life with no surprises in it. Work, groceries, gym, sleep. Repeat. Safe enough to stop hurting, dull enough to stop feeling like much of anything. She watched me differently after that. Not like a boss. Not even like someone older trying to figure me out. More like we had both accidentally shown up without the right armor on. At one point her fingers brushed mine when I took her empty mug to refill it, and both of us noticed. Neither of us said anything. The silence after that was not the same as before. When she finally stood to leave, Daylight had started to flatten the room. She looked more put together than when she arrived, but only slightly. Like she had borrowed an hour of stability and knew it might not last. At the door, she turned back and said, "This morning can't follow us into the office." I nodded. I know, but I also knew that was already impossible. Because once you've seen someone at their worst in your kitchen before sunrise, once they've looked at you like you were not just another person orbiting their job, there is no clean way back to normal. She held my gaze a second too long, then left. I locked the door, stood there in the quiet, and understood two things at once. First, I was definitely in trouble. Second, the part that scared me most was that I didn't want to be out of it. The worst part was that nothing obvious changed after that morning. She still walked into the office like she owned it. People still straightened up when she passed. Meetings still started the second she sat down. If somebody had told me I imagined the whole thing, that she had never been in my kitchen before sunrise with tired eyes and shaking hands around a coffee mug, part of me might have believed it. Then she looked at me for half a second too long in the Monday operations meeting, and I knew I hadn't imagined anything. It was a small thing. Nobody else would have noticed it. She was at the head of the table, talking through numbers for the next quarter, and I was halfway down on the left side with my laptop open, doing what I always did. Listening, taking notes, staying useful. At one point she asked me a direct question about a vendor delay, and when I answered, her face stayed still, but her eyes changed. Not warm, not soft, just aware. Like she could still see my kitchen too. I got through the meeting, closed my laptop, and left with everybody else. By the time I made it back to my desk, I was annoyed at myself for being that thrown off by one look. That should have been the end of it. Instead, around 11, an email came through from her assistant asking if I could bring revised projections up to the executive floor. Normally I would have sent them. That day I printed them and took the elevator. The executive floor always felt too quiet, like even the carpet was expensive. Her assistant was on a call when I arrived, so she just pointed me toward the office with 2 fingers and mouth. "Go ahead." I stepped inside, set the papers on the side table by her desk, and said, "Updated version." She looked up from her screen, closed the door. My hand paused on the knob for maybe half a second before I did it. Not all the way, just enough to cut the noise from outside. She leaned back in her chair and studied me. At work she usually spoke fast, like every sentence had somewhere else to be. This time she didn't. "You seem nervous," she said. I gave a short laugh. "You showed up at my apartment at 5 in the morning 2 days ago." "Yes," she said. "I remember." There was something almost unfair about the way she said that. Calm, direct, like she knew exactly what that morning had done and wasn't pretending otherwise. "I just wanted to thank you," she said. "Properly. You already did." "Not really." I stayed standing because sitting felt too familiar and too dangerous. "You don't have to do this here." Her mouth shifted like she knew I was right. "No, I probably don't." For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she asked, "Did I make your life harder?" I could have lied. I probably should have. Instead I said, "Yes." She let out a breath and nodded once. "I'm sorry." The thing was, she looked like she meant it. Not in the polished way people say sorry because it keeps a situation neat. She looked honestly uncomfortable. Human again. That was what kept throwing me off. I knew how to deal with a CEO. I did not know how to deal with a woman who had become real in front of me, and then put the suit back on. I left her office with my pulse acting stupid, and spent the rest of the day pretending I was focused on spreadsheets. After that, it turned into small things. A question from her that could have gone through 2 other people, but somehow came straight to me. An extra second by the elevator after everyone else got off. A late reply on a team thread followed by a private message 2 minutes later asking, "Did that sound too harsh?" The first time that happened, I stared at my phone for a full minute before answering. "No, just direct." She sent back, "That's your polite way of saying yes." I smiled before I could stop myself. That was how it started outside work. Not with some big decision. Just little openings neither of us closed. At first it was practical. She asked what people were really saying about the possible company sale, because nobody talked to her normally anymore. I told her the truth. That people were nervous, guessing, overreading everything. She asked if I was worried. I wrote back, "I'm in operations. We're paid to expect problems." She replied, "That's the most you thing I've ever heard." I sat there looking at that message like an idiot. Because the strange part was, she was getting to know me. Me. Not the version of me that answered questions in meetings. Not the guy who fixed process issues and kept his head down. She was paying attention in a way no one had in a long time. A week later she called me at night. Not late enough to be reckless. Just late enough that I knew it wasn't about work the second I saw her name. I almost let it ring out. Then I answered. "Hey," I said. There was traffic noise on her end. A car door shut. Then her voice. "I'm sorry. Bad time." No, that was not fully true. I had been doing laundry and trying very hard to live a boring, sensible life. "I just got out of dinner with lawyers," she said. And I realized I didn't want to go home yet. I leaned back against my kitchen counter. Same kitchen. Same counter she had stood near that morning. "So you called me?" "Yes." She said it so simply that I had no defense against it. Hit subscribe and drop a like. It really helps. Now let me tell you where this went next. We talked for almost 40 minutes. Some of it was about the sale. Most of it wasn't. She told me she hated how every conversation lately sounded like strategy. I told her I hated how easy it had become for me to disappear inside routine. She laughed more on that call than I had ever heard in the office. Not loudly, just honestly. After that, I became the person she reached for when she was done performing. And she became the part of my day I started organizing everything else around. We still acted normal at work. We had to. If anything, we got more careful. I called her by her last name in meetings. She kept her tone even with me in front of other people. But underneath all of it was this private current that made every ordinary moment feel loaded. One evening, we ended up leaving at the same time. Pure accident, at least on paper. We met in the parking garage by the elevators, both of us tired, both carrying more than we should have. She stopped beside her car and looked at me for a second. "You know what the problem is?" "What?" "I miss talking to you when I'm standing right in front of you." She said that in an empty parking garage and didn't take it back. Have you ever had someone say something like that to you at the worst possible moment? Drop it below. That hit me harder than it should have. I looked around the garage, even though it was empty. You really can't say things like that down here. A faint smile touched her mouth. I know. But she didn't take it back. Neither of us moved. The distance between us was still safe, technically. Still reasonable. But it didn't feel safe anymore. It felt thin. Finally I said, "We need to be careful." Her expression changed at that. Softer, but sadder too. "I am being careful." That stayed with me the whole drive home. Because she was right. Careful was exactly what this was. No line crossed. No excuse for anybody to point and call it something ugly. Just two people trying not to walk straight into a wall they could both already see. But by then the truth was obvious. I was no longer waiting for her to leave my life and return to being just the woman at the top of the org chart. And she was no longer calling me because of one bad night. Something had opened between us, and both of us knew it. We just had not decided yet whether knowing that was enough, or whether sooner or later it was going to pull us into something neither of us could pretend was innocent anymore. By the time people started saying the sale was probably only weeks away, the whole company felt tighter. Not louder, just tighter. More closed-door meetings. More last-minute calendar changes. More people pretending not to notice when senior leadership disappeared for 2 hours and came back looking like they had aged a year over lunch. Everybody was trying to guess what the next version of the company would look like and whether they would still fit inside it. She looked like she was holding the whole thing up with one hand. At work, she got even better at being unreadable. That was the strange part. The more pressure she was under, the cleaner her public face became. In meetings, she was sharp, controlled, almost impossible to interrupt. She made decisions faster. She wasted less time. She had that look people get when they are running on discipline instead of sleep. But I knew the difference now. I could tell when she had not eaten. I could tell when she had spent half the night with lawyers. I could tell when she was one careless question away from walking out of a room and sitting in her car with the door closed for 10 minutes just to breathe. Nobody else seemed to see it. Or maybe they did, but not the way I did. One Thursday evening, I was still at my desk around 8, finishing a report I should have been done with hours earlier, when my phone buzzed. "Are you still here?" No name. No greeting. Just that. I looked toward the glass wall at the far end of the floor, where the executive offices were mostly dark. "Yes," I wrote back. A few seconds later, "Come upstairs. Side conference room." I sat there staring at the message, already knowing I was going to do exactly what she asked. The executive floor was nearly empty. Her assistant was gone. The lights were dimmer. It felt less like the top level of a company and more like some after-hours version of it, where normal rules were thinner. She was in the side conference room by the windows, heels off, jacket folded over the back of a chair, one hand pressed to her forehead. There was a stack of documents spread across the table and a half-finished bottle of water near her elbow. When she looked up at me, she didn't even try to act formal. "I need 10 minutes where nobody wants anything from me," she said. I closed the door behind me. "That bad?" She laughed once, tired. "Worse." I sat across from her, and for a minute neither of us said anything. The city below looked cold and distant through the glass. Inside the room, it was just the hum of the air system and the sound of her pushing papers into one uneven pile, like she was angry at them for existing. Then she leaned back and said, "Do you ever look around and realize everyone in the room is talking to your position, not to you?" "All the time," I said. That made her look up. "Really? I'm in operations," I said. "Half the time people talk to me like I'm either a problem or a solution, not a person." That got a real smile out of her. Small, but real. She shook her head. "I shouldn't have asked you up here." "No," I said. "Probably not." "And you still came." "Yeah." That settled between us in a way neither of us could pretend not to understand. She stood up and walked to the window, crossing her arms like she was cold even though the room was warm. "They keep talking about transition like it's a clean word," she said, "as if one life ends on Friday and another starts Monday." I watched her reflection in the glass. "It's not clean." She gave me a look over her shoulder. "You know it's not." And I did. Not fully. Not from her side. But enough. I got up and moved closer, not right next to her, just near enough that the distance felt deliberate. "You don't have to keep being impressive around me." Her eyes dropped for a second. "That's the problem." "What is?" "I don't know how to stop." There it was again. That thing she only gave me. Not weakness exactly. Just the truth before it had been organized into something neat. I said, "Then don't." "Not all at once." She looked at me for a long moment after that, and the room changed. I don't mean anything dramatic. No music in the background. No sudden rush. Just that quiet shift where both people know they have stepped into a more honest version of the same moment, and there is no pretending otherwise. She said my name softly, and I swear that was worse than if she had said something bigger. I was close enough by then to see how tired she really was. Close enough to notice the way her hand opened and closed once at her side, like she was stopping herself from reaching for me. My whole body was aware of her. Not in some stupid, reckless way. In a careful, almost painful one. I said, "Tell me to go and I will." She didn't answer right away. Then she said, "That's not what I want." I exhaled slowly. "I know." That was the first time we admitted it out loud. Not everything, but enough. She turned fully toward me then, and for a second neither of us moved, because once you move, the moment becomes real. Her face had that same unguarded look from my kitchen, just steadier now. Less lost. More certain, which somehow made it harder. "I hate this timing," she said. "Me too. I hate that every part of this can be questioned." "I know. And I still." She stopped there, jaw tightening, like even now she was trying to control how much she gave away. I finished it for her, because by then I was tired of both of us pretending restraint meant silence. "You still want to be here?" Her eyes held mine. "Yes." I nodded once. "Me too." That should have broken the moment, maybe. Made it too real, too awkward, too dangerous. Instead it did the opposite. It stripped away the last fake layer between us. She stepped closer first. Not much. Just enough that I could feel the heat of her. Enough that if either of us leaned in even slightly the line would be gone. My hand lifted before I thought better of it, and stopped near her waist, not touching. Waiting. She looked down at it, then back at me, and I saw the exact second she chose honesty over caution. She took my wrist lightly and moved my hand to her side. It was the smallest contact possible, and it still felt like a full admission. I swear I felt every inch of that moment. She closed her eyes briefly, and I could tell from the way she breathed that this had not become simple for her just because she wanted it. It was still complicated, still badly timed, still tied to titles, to the company, to the fact that one version of our lives had not ended yet. That was exactly why I forced myself to stay still. When she opened her eyes again, she looked almost frustrated by my restraint. "You're being very good," she said quietly. "That's not what this is." "What is it then?" I swallowed. Me trying not to turn something real into something we regret. That hit her hard. I could see it. Because the truth was, I wanted her. Of course I did. But by then that was not the main thing anymore. The main thing was that somewhere between late calls, parking garage conversations, and that first impossible morning in my apartment, she had become important to me in a way desire alone could not explain. She leaned her forehead against my shoulder for a second, and that nearly undid me more than a kiss would have. "I'm tired," she said. "I know. Of being careful?" "No," she said. "Of being watched. Of being interpreted. Of being turned into a role every time I walk into a room." Without thinking, I touched the back of her neck, slow and gentle. "You're not a role right now." She let out a breath against my shirt that felt almost like relief. We stood there like that longer than we should have. Eventually she pulled back just enough to look at me. Her face was close to mine now, close enough that there was no confusion left between us. "If the sale closes," she said, "everything changes." I nodded. "Yeah. If I stay, this gets worse." "I know. And if you and I do this before that," she didn't finish. "We'll always know exactly how it started," I said. She looked down, then back up. "You really do make the difficult version sound obvious." "It is obvious. Does that make you angry?" I thought about it and said, honestly, "A little." That surprised her. I gave a short laugh. "Not at you. Just at the timing. At the fact that I finally care about something enough to stop coasting through my life. And of course it has to be this." For the first time in days, maybe longer, she looked lighter. Not happy. Just seen. Her thumb brushed once against the inside of my wrist where she was still holding me, and that tiny movement told me more than anything else could have. This was real. Not a rebound. Not loneliness wearing expensive clothes. Not some private game she played because her marriage had ended and she needed somebody nearby to absorb the shock. Real enough to stop. Real enough to wait. She let go of my wrist then, slowly, like neither of us wanted to be the one to end the moment. "We can't keep doing this much longer," she said. "No. The sale is close." "I know." She nodded once. "Then when it happens, we decide." There was no dramatic promise in it. No big declaration. Just a line drawn in plain language, which somehow made it feel even more serious. When I left that conference room, I felt wrecked in the strangest possible way. Not because something had gone wrong, but because something had almost gone very right, and we had both chosen to stop before it turned into the wrong version of itself. The next week, the sale rumors got stronger. Calendars filled up. Lawyers appeared in hallways. People started speaking in careful tones about the future like it was already in the building. And underneath all of that, she and I moved through the office knowing the same thing. A decision was coming. Not someday. Not eventually. Soon enough that every look felt sharper. Every private message mattered more. And every moment we held the line started to feel less like safety and more like the last stretch before something had to change. The announcement came on a Tuesday morning. By 9:30, everybody had the same company-wide email open, pretending to read it carefully even though most people had already skipped to the part that mattered. The sale was official. There were a lot of polished words about continuity, growth, strategic direction, and what the next phase would look like. The kind of language that says everything and nothing at the same time. What mattered was simple. The company was changing hands. And by noon, the second piece of news started moving through the building faster than the first. She was leaving. Not immediately that minute, but soon. Cleanly. On purpose. She was not staying on to guide the next chapter or attach herself to the new structure just because everyone expected her to. She had decided to step out completely. I read that part 3 times. Then I locked my screen and sat there staring at my desk while the office kept moving around me. Conversations started and stopped. People walked past acting like they were calm. Somebody laughed too loudly near the printers. My phone buzzed twice with messages from coworkers guessing what it all meant. I ignored all of them. Because for the first time since she showed up at my door before sunrise, the obstacle we had kept circling was no longer theoretical. It was gone, or close enough to gone that pretending otherwise would have been cowardly. I did not see her the rest of that day. She was in meetings, then in calls, then apparently with legal. The building felt full of her and empty of her at the same time. Every room carried the fact that she was still technically there, and already halfway out. At 6:15, when I was packing up to leave, my phone lit up. Parking garage. Lower level. 10 minutes. No greeting. No signature. She didn't need one. By the time I got down there, she was standing near the far wall by the private elevator, coat on, keys in one hand. The garage was quiet except for the occasional echo of tires from the upper ramp. She looked tired again, but different from that first morning. Back then she had looked undone. Now she looked like somebody who had finally made a hard choice and was still getting used to the weight of it. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then I said, "So it's done." She nodded. "Yes." "And you're really leaving?" "Yes." I let out a breath that almost turned into a laugh. "You actually did it." That got the smallest smile out of her. "You sound surprised." "I think I got used to the idea that you could carry impossible things forever." "I did too," she said. We stood there with a few feet between us, and for once it didn't feel like the distance was protecting anything. It just felt unnecessary. She looked at me for a long second, then said, "I asked you here because I don't want this to turn vague now." That was exactly like her. Even here. Even now. Clear, direct, no hiding behind timing anymore. I nodded. "Okay." Her eyes dropped briefly to the floor, then back to mine. I need to know this wasn't just about what was happening to me. I knew what she meant. The divorce. The sale. The pressure. The collapse of one version of her life, and the confusion of the next. I had asked myself the same question more than once, usually late at night, when I was trying to be rational and failing. So I answered carefully. "If this had only been about timing," I said, "it would have burned off by now." She stayed very still. I kept going because there was no point stopping halfway anymore. I didn't fall for the version of you everybody else got. Not the one in meetings. Not the one people are probably talking about right now upstairs. I took a step closer. I fell for the woman who stood in my kitchen before sunrise looking exhausted and honest, and completely done pretending she was fine. Her face changed at that. Not dramatically, just enough that I knew I had hit the center of it. I said, "That's who I want. Not the title. Not the role. Her." She looked away for a second, and when she looked back there was no executive polish left at all. "With you," she said quietly. I stopped feeling like I had to arrive as something. I didn't say anything. I just let her say it. She took a breath. "Do you know how rare that is for me?" "I can guess." "No," she said, and gave a small shake of her head. "I don't think you can." There was no sharpness in it. Just honesty. She stepped closer then, and this time neither of us stopped at the safe distance. We were near enough that I could see the tiredness around her eyes. Near enough to remember every moment that had led us here. The coffee in my kitchen, the careful messages, the parking garage conversations, the late call from outside a lawyer dinner, the conference room where we stood too close and forced ourselves not to go further. All of it had led to this exact thing. Not drama. Not some grand scene. Just two people with no more excuse left. "I was scared," she said. "Of what?" "That once all the reasons disappeared, maybe you would too." That hit me harder than I expected. I gave a quiet laugh, mostly because the truth was almost insulting. "You think I made it through all of that just to disappear now?" A real smile touched her mouth then, brief but warm. "I hope not." I reached for her hand, and this time there was nothing complicated about it. No office above us. No title hanging over the moment. No question about who could see or what it would mean. Just her hand fitting into mine like we had both been thinking about it for too long. "I don't want the almost version of this," I said. "I don't want the secret version either." She looked at our hands together and nodded once. "Neither do I. So what are we doing?" Her eyes came back to mine. "Trying. For real." Simple words. That was all. And maybe that was why they mattered. Because by then anything bigger would have sounded fake. We didn't need huge promises in a parking garage. We needed the plain truth. That this had not been an accident anymore. That we were choosing it with open eyes. That whatever came next would belong to two actual people, not a CEO and an employee hiding behind timing and restraint. I lifted my free hand to her face, slow enough that she could have pulled away if she wanted. She didn't. She leaned into it the slightest bit, and that tiny movement felt more intimate than anything else had. Then I kissed her. Not like the moment in the conference room that never fully happened. Not like something reckless we would later have to explain away. This was steady, certain, long overdue without feeling rushed. The kind of kiss that does not ask a question because both people already know the answer. When we pulled back, she stayed close, forehead resting lightly against mine. "Well," she said softly, "that was less complicated than I expected." I laughed. "That's because we spent months doing the complicated part first." She smiled at that, and for the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely light. Not because her life had suddenly become easy. It hadn't. She still had a divorce behind her, a company behind her, and a whole future that probably looked less clear than everyone assumed. But she was finally standing there as herself, and somehow that made the uncertainty feel smaller. We left the garage separately because old habits do not vanish in 1 minute. But before she opened her car door, she turned back and said, "Dinner tomorrow?" I looked at her and felt something in me settle in the simplest, strongest way. "Yeah," I said. "Tomorrow. No secret meeting. No careful explanation. Just dinner. Just us." I watched her drive out, then stood there for a second in the quiet with my keys in my